Welcome back to Telco Talk. Still in studio with me, I have Arthur Goldstuck, MD of World Wide Worx, and Edwin Thompson, General Manager, Technology and Infrastructure for MTN Business. Now, Arthur, in the first half of the show, you mentioned the concept of bring your own device. What does this actually mean for a business, and is it not just a security headache for the CIO?
The big issue is that in the past, the company typically would either issue phones to staff or they would dictate what phones staff could bring into the company and connect to the network. But now you have a situation where people have so much choice of high-end phones, and there's such a push towards especially iPhones and Android devices that the network administrators find themselves compelled to adjust the strategy, or the chief information officer has to allow the strategy to be adjusted to allow people to literally bring their own device. Add to that the whole tablet explosion. At the end of May, we had 523,000 tablets sold in South Africa. You have a situation where you cannot say no, we're only allowing the good old laptop or PC to connect to the network, and perhaps the BlackBerry, because that's the one that was designed to tie into network security. They suddenly have to change not just their policies but also processes in the organization, and that brings in great complexity and also confusion.
It's all about mobility of the workforce these days. As Arthur mentioned, bring your own device. Everybody is on the go. You want to carry a tablet around instead of the traditional laptop because it's lighter. What does the situation look like in Africa, where we know mobile penetration is, I want to say at an all-time high, but it's growing every month, year on year? What are you seeing from that perspective?
Look, mobile penetration obviously is the best penetration that we'll have from an African perspective. Going back to the security question before we talk too much about the other stuff, security at the end of the day is always 95% of your security is actually an internal issue. If you don't manage the way that your users use devices, your policies and controls around those devices, you are going to have trouble with them. These are typically the issues which CIOs have to battle with when using these mobile devices as a business tool. If you've got your email, which could have sensitive information on it, sitting in someone's hands who's walking around the streets, could drop the device. If that device is not properly protected with passwords or the ability to remote wipe it if it goes missing, those sort of things, it's a critical issue for the CIO. But if you have a look at most of these operating systems, it started out with operating systems like BlackBerry, which allowed you to remote wipe devices if the device got stolen or anything of that sort of nature. Most of the other operating systems are allowing for the same thing these days. So there is the ability for your network administration division to actually look after those devices much more efficiently these days.
But if they don't, it could be costly because of that sort of data. Let's say you're an auditing firm and you're sitting with the financial data for a lot of big companies, and something like that gets compromised. That's a lot of money on your bottom line.
Absolutely correct. The misunderstanding about stolen laptops, especially at airports and the like, and lifting taxis, is that it's the value of the laptop that you're losing. And it's not. It's the value of the data it contains. We haven't seen the kind of massively embarrassing scenarios in this country that they've had, especially in the United Kingdom and to some extent in the United States. But in the UK, we've seen members of Parliament and attachés to the Prime Minister losing laptops in the back of taxis. And the most incredible data suddenly being out in the wild. And the reputational damage that results from that is far greater than the economic damage.
Does that mean that our employees are more careful, or does it mean that our CIOs are doing a better job at protecting the data?
I think our CIOs tend to be more paranoid, which in the world of data security is never a bad thing.
Let's get back to Africa. What are some of the trends outside?
Look, the trends in Africa are obviously moving up the tree as such in terms of the devices out there. Obviously, what Africa is waiting for is the low-cost smartphone environment. It's quite surprising if you go and have a look at in a lot of the African countries how popular social media is specifically. I think we've had some very interesting examples. If we have a look at what has happened up in the northern parts of Africa, where products like Facebook and Twitter have been effectively used to get a message across and effectively have caused total revolutions. Africa as a whole is very hungry to get access to information, not just communications, not just making a call from point A to point B. So obviously, you know, that's where this market's going.
Let's look at the Asian influence. Companies like Huawei coming into Africa and offering those cheaper smartphone services. From a business perspective, if I'm operating in Africa at obviously a lower cost base, how viable are these types of smartphones in my business?
These are the phones that can change the market. We had a situation in Kenya, for example, where Huawei came in at the beginning of last year with their Idios smartphone. They marketed it as a Google phone with Facebook and Twitter built in. And overnight, it killed off Nokia in the smartphone market. The market's probably shifted again since then. But for the first few months of last year, suddenly Huawei was the biggest smartphone brand in that market. And Nokia became a bit player alongside Samsung as a smartphone player. But in the broader market, feature phones or ordinary phones are still the dominant phones. So they still have to be allowed for. And particularly across Africa, you'll find that more emphasis still has to be placed on the feature phone than the smartphone. But that's going to change. Next year in South Africa, for the first time, more smartphones will be sold than feature phones. And that trend will repeat itself across Africa over the coming few years. So in the next few years, you'll see CIOs across the continent having to rethink the way they approach the whole issue of integrating phones into the business.
Edwin, again, you're a player in the African market. When you're servicing these clients who cannot necessarily afford the most expensive smartphone that is on your base, how do you tackle that problem from an African's perspective? Because you have the Samsungs, you have the Nokias, you have the iPhones on your bouquet of phones. What are you offering those African clients?
We're offering a whole host of different handsets, and you'll find that most of the network providers offer a range really to suit whatever the market is demanding at any point in time. You must remember, in some of the markets that we're playing, we're even having to go as far as looking for solutions where there is not electricity, phones which have solar panels on them, those sort of devices. So it is an incredibly broad environment in which we operate. Every single country is different. So where we're talking about South Africa, we're talking about an advanced market. As Arthur has just said, we're already seeing massive growth in the smartphone environment here. Even places like Nigeria are starting to grow quite dramatically in that specific area. However, that market again has got a very, very broad base of telephony requirements as well.
It's all about innovation. At the end of the day, as Edwin said, each market being handled as a separate territory. How important is it to understand each market separately, understanding it as a unit and not necessarily that it's just part of Africa?
It's crucial to understand that each market is different. There's no one-size-fits-all solution. And a great example of that is that Huawei Idios phone that changed the Kenya market. They launched it in South Africa, but with a completely different bundling, and it disappeared without a trace. They tried to do the same in Nigeria as they did in Kenya, the same kind of bundle. It also simply didn't work because the dynamics of that market and the culture of how phones are sold in that market is so different to Kenya that it also simply made no impression. So every market has to be treated differently. We also see it in the mobile payments arena, where MTN have had great success in countries like Uganda and Ghana, for example. But they haven't replicated that in every other country, even countries that neighbor those. And it just shows the extent to which a solution works perfectly in one territory, but simply doesn't translate into the one next door.
Let's talk about roaming costs. If you are a businessman who travels all across the continent, you take your handset or your tablet with you and you expect to be connected in each territory. But the roaming cost from a South African perspective into the rest of the continent is still, in my opinion, ridiculous. I just came back from Mauritius last week, and the local provider that I'm on kindly sent me an SMS to warn me about the data charges, over 100 Rand per megabit. How are you tackling that problem? Because, I mean, if you have a mobile workforce traveling and you're a businessman, you want the best rates for the best services.
Absolutely. From our perspective, one of the big drives within our business is to get a predictable roaming rate out there. It's quite easy, obviously, to deal with where we are talking about MTN to MTN environments. Very, very difficult to deal with scenarios where we're roaming MTN subscribers onto another network who may be dictating high levels of costs, vice versa. It is one of those areas where, from a business perspective, obviously, we're very much interested in that business market and ensuring that at the end of the day we're able to create that predictability in terms of what happens across the continent when our subscriber is roaming from a business perspective.
What is going to drive the costs coming down though, Arthur? Is it a fact of we need more sophisticated infrastructure in the continent, better broadband,
no, I believe
3G services?
I believe we need more outrage from customers at those high roaming costs.
I'm outraged after last week.
I've been outraged several times, I have to say. And I find that the network's excuses and reasons just aren't good enough, because if you take MTN and Vodacom together and their networks across Africa and the Middle East in MTN's case, and Vodacom being part of Vodafone, which is a global player, surely they have the power to negotiate within their own organizations and across major telcos globally some kind of resolution to this absurdly and damagingly high cost of roaming data. In the EU, they've mandated a cap on that because it's clearly, I won't say criminal, but certainly damaging and not in the interest of customers whatsoever. So can we have a resolution from the networks?
Edwin, are you in agreement with that? Are you engaging with the other players?
Absolutely. We have a group within our global organization who are specifically focused on bringing down roaming costs overall. Unfortunately, it is one of those scenarios that you do have to get agreement between different players to get it down. We've put some quite interesting initiatives in where we are obviously MTN to MTN organizations. If you're roaming around the what we call the SEA region, or the Southeast African regions, you'll find that if you're picking up a call in one of our other regions, we don't actually charge you for picking up the call, which is different if you're roaming onto another network. So there's quite a lot of those sort of innovations coming along to actually make it much more affordable to actually use these telephones on a roaming basis. One of the things that we don't really want, which happens all the time, is the first thing a lot of people do is when they get into a country, they buy a local SIM card. We should be getting to the point where it is advantageous for me to simply keep my SIM card in my phone, and it's going to cost me more or less the same amount of money.
Gentlemen, we only have a minute to go. Quick 30 seconds. Your advice to businesses and to telcos, cost benefits, how do I get the best value from the services I'm getting? Do I need to be outraged?
You should be outraged at data roaming charges, but aside from that, simply be awake and alert, because as fast as change is now, it's going to be even faster in the near future. So you have to be flexible, and you have to keep in touch with your service provider to understand what they have to offer and what will benefit you the most. Don't just stick to what you've been using for the last few years.
Edwin, last words.
Our focus is big time on the enterprise network, looking at what we're doing across Africa, ensuring exactly, going back to the scenario of the businessman traveling, ensuring that the businessman can get pretty similar services no matter where he's traveling within our operations. It's one of the dreams we have, and we believe we'll get there.
And we'll follow your progress. Gentlemen, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We've come to the end of this month's edition of Telco Talk. Until next time, it's goodbye and thank you for watching.